My name is Stephen Bergeron. I'm the Vice President of Global Marketing for APG, also known as the bow tie guy. I have no idea why, but it just kind of stuck. So what happened back in April and in March, we talked with Amber and Kelly, and there's been a series of webinars offered by the RSPA over the last year. If you're not attending them, I strongly suggest you do. But as a result of that, there's 12 lingering questions about how do I turn this tablet into a point-of-sale system. If I turn this tablet into a point-of-sale system, what are the security ramifications? Okay, I figured out how to turn the tablet into a point-of-sale system. Now we got this EMV thing coming along. Now what do I do with this tablet that's supposed to be a point-of-sale system? So what I'm hoping is the 200 years of experience that's up here is going to help answer some of those questions. We've got way limited time, but our goal in the next 50 minutes is to demystify, love that word, demystify, mPOS and peripheral management, because nobody knows how to plug all of these, how do we get a scanner to work with a printer and a cash drawer and all of that fun stuff. So how do we manage the peripherals? What are we going to do with EMV? And lastly, what are we going to do, what happens with PCI and all of that stuff as we move forward? There is an elephant in this room, and it is not me. So the first question is actually the last question we got from Amber and Kelly. So I'm going to start by putting Adam on the spot. He's the biggest guy on the panel. So that suit is made of Kevlar, just so you know. So here's the hot potato. There is no iOS or Android POS system on PCI's list of validated applications. Even though encrypted credit card data is going through these tablets, how can an ISO or an Android POS provider claim that using encrypting magtext, magstripe readers and non-PCI validated, unlisted, point-to-point encrypted that are totally out of scope with PCI? So Adam is with 403 Labs, so let's throw the potato at him and see what he comes up with.
Can everyone hear me? All right. So the biggest problem when it comes to tablets or anything that is based upon a mobile platform, be it iOS or Android, and I'm sure that many of you are familiar with this when you install an application on your phone. You click install and you see all of these additional permissions you're giving this device. Clipboard, your phone, your contacts, people you called, your memory space on that phone itself. So whenever you put anything into that phone, any app that is installed on that phone potentially has access to that data. Now, if the device itself is encrypting that data, then there's a moment that before that device has encrypted that data where it's sitting there in clear text. You swipe the card, it goes through a headphone jack, and it's on that phone. And this means that anything that you have on your phone that is potentially malicious can access that data itself. So the counter question is, okay, so let's say I have a card swipe device that's encrypted. So if I'm encrypting the swipe before it gets to the phone, why is this out of scope? Well, ultimately it could be. And if the solution is evaluated, which means that somebody has, like me or an equivalent, has pounded on this device and rated it as secure enough that it can't be tampered with, then you can use that device as a potential P2PE solution. But you can't just take somebody's word for it. I mean, you could have, Jim's pretty good secure reading and encryption device. You plug it in your phone. We don't know what it does. We don't know how it's decrypted. So ultimately, to make a really long answer short, is it really depends. But if the solution has been validated, it can be done. If it hasn't, then don't do it. But if you, sorry to interrupt, if you want to talk after this discussion, we can go on at length about it, and you can, we can talk in the hallway, or you can find me in the foyer later today.
Cool. So I'm of the edict that, yes, software can fix problems, but so can hardware. And it's kind of a mix in between. So Eric is with ID Tech, so I'm going to pass the potato to you and give your interjection.
Yeah, I was going to add to what Adam was, I turned it off so I didn't make sound. It's on? Yeah, I was going to add to what Adam was saying, that I think the best is to encrypt at the head, or as close to the head as you can. So by the time the data gets to the POS or the tablet or whatever device you have, then it's already encrypted, and whatever software you have there is basically, out of scope. There are kind of two methods where you can do encryption, or you can do protection. One is what I would call passive security. You put as much protection as you can, but somebody with padding or all of those kind of hardware protection to protect the data that is in the head or that is in the device. The other one is a little bit more sophisticated and will meet PCI SRED certification, that's active security. So what you do when you do active security, you have what you have in passive, but on top of it, you have electronic that will erase any data, any key that is in the device in case somebody was to try to access the device. So the most protection you can get is get a PCI SRED device, then connect it to pretty much anything, because by the time it gets that anything is protected, and then it can be an open network like the internet, or it can be a POS, and it will only be decrypted in the back end close to the HSM.
Perfect. So continuing with that train of thought, so if I'm a reseller, how can I help retailers implement a secure network? I'll start with David, because you've got some software that has to talk if you're in an mPOS environment. How do we get to the next levels? And then at some point you're handing it over into an infrastructure that we've got to have certified from Adam's team as well. So you start with the software, we've got a level there, and then we go back into a network environment.
Sure, so as we're, is this on?
Yes.
Already, okay. Yeah, as we're getting into more of a wireless environment, we have all these point of sale terminals out there. It used to be wired, that was more secure, going to wireless. You're kind of making some assumptions, especially in the SMB world, that you have security on. And I think that's a bad assumption to make, because even if the dealer sets up the security, you don't know if the end user is going to mess with it, not mess with it, how secure it is, how well they actually maintain that. So I'm actually a big fan of, if you have your point of sale solution and you're going in a wireless network, don't take any risks of the scope and try to move towards an out-of-scope solution. So we're really proponents of, yes, you should secure your network, yes, you should have antivirus and do all the proper things, and use a PADSS validated application if possible, but look at your actual payment technology. And there's really three different ways that you can attach, or you can have point of sale and payment processing. One of them is non-integrated, which means your payment device is completely separate from your POS, and it's not really a great customer experience, because you have those, you ring it up here, then you got to type in the dollar amount there on the second terminal. Not so good. You have the fully integrated, which is what most point of sale people are selling today. Where all the payments are routing, as you mentioned before, the data is routing right into the point of sale system, encrypted or not, sometimes yes, sometimes no, and the point of sale is processing the card. Really, I think the better way to do it nowadays, especially with all the EMV compliance and all these breaches that are happening and everything else, is to use something called semi-integrated, which means that the point of sale is driving the actual transaction, but all the transaction data is going directly from your payment device right up to your processor. That can happen either through hardware, it can also be driven by software in the case of what DataCap does, And what that means is that your point of sale software never gets access or visibility to the credit card data, encrypted or not, at all. So if somebody does actually breach your point of sale software, it's like breaking into Fort Knox without the gold. There's nothing there of use, to any data thief. So I think that's really, to me, yes, you want to secure your network, but I would pay more attention to, are you using technology that can actually just avoid any risk whatsoever. That's something that we're actually installing now. We're really excited about it. It's very, customers actually really understand it. When we explain to them, data never goes into the POS, they get it. It's a pretty simple concept, and they embrace it.
Adam?
as far as a network is concerned, as far as PCI is concerned, anything on that network, a network's a really chatty place. It's, I mean, no one listens to their Ethernet cable, right? But if you were to listen to that traffic, every device is constantly talking. And when person A is talking to person B, person C can often pick that up. So network segmentation is something that we preach constantly in PCI DSS, and your end user, your merchant, isn't going to know what that means. They're not going to know how to configure their device. So we implore resellers, anybody who's going to be installing these devices, to look at how those devices are connected and to, if possible, segment them so that you do have a point of sale machine talking to a back of house, but not to their, the computer they use to surf the internet. Or in the case of having something that only processes credit card data, then you have that on its own segment, so it can communicate with processors, but everything else, if you have pretty much any other device you would have connected to the internet with, would be on its own segment. And that way, there's no overlap of those two networks.
Justin, anything to contribute?
Just I would say if you're going to be if you're offering a point of sale solution, you want to try and get to an out-of-scope solution as best you can. You want to pull that data off of your system. Let the people that are going to be going through the PADSS validations, the EMV certifications, handle that on your behalf, and you just work on expanding your point of sale offering and competing in that marketplace.
Super. The other question that has come up repeatedly is, okay, so I'm used to selling a big box, typically from one of the bigger OEMs that I'm putting a bunch of data on, and I sell it as an integrated point of sale system. How do I transition my customers for traditional big box POS into tablet POS? And it's not necessarily trivial as we make that migration. Tom, any thoughts to that?
The transition, there are many that believe that the transition is difficult. It really depends on the segment. If you look at the SMB market, they're more adaptive to that type of technology, and it really depends upon what the value proposition is for them. I live in a resort town, Park City, Utah, and the city council promotes independent store owners. So if you look at Park City, it's a lot of independent store owners versus large chains, and it's a great learning lab for the transformation of point of sale. And one of the key differentiators in who adopts tablet and who stays traditional has everything to do with the total cost of ownership and the value proposition that's provided. We have had merchants that have did the 60-day trial on tablet POS. We had one go back because it was an old mom-and-pop coffee shop run by folks who have been running it for decades. And when they transfer that business over to their grandchildren, that's when you're going to see that transformation, because they're already used to that technology. The overwhelming majority of folks that have looked at the value proposition of automating their enterprise have gone to tablet and stayed. We have had restaurants that have had ownership changes that have been pillars in the Park City community, move to tablet and move to pay at the table, and wondering why they haven't done that years ago. Mobile POS provided them the opportunity and the value proposition to automate their business. And that's the key. For retailers, for big box retailers, what we have found at Epson is that they're looking at how to make that work. Many of them are using it as an addition to their traditional POS, like pop-up POS. If there's a TV program or sale running over in audiovisual, that they can bring a pop-up stand that is tablet, fully wired, but mobile based upon a cart. So they're looking at how they can use mobile to augment what they currently have. But SMBs, they're the ones moving toward it because the value proposition and the total cost of ownership is right in that sweet spot.
Thanks. Paul, I know you've been involved in some, both large and small conversations on this migration. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have two thoughts. I've talked to customers at all levels of the size and scope and scale in retail. Probably the biggest customer that I've talked to in this was about 4 years ago, and they said something that still resonates with me today, and it's kind of informed a lot of the directions that we've taken, and it's not really a secret or anything, but when he said to me in a conversation about a cash drawer application was, what I really care about with respect to the hardware at the front end is really what the consumer brings into the store with them. And what the consumer brings into the store with them is their credit card and cash. And so that informed their decision-making processes for their hardware selection and everything, every direction that they took. And that helped steer a lot of our thought processes with our product directions, and it's led us to making all kinds of new products that make it possible to interact. And we make a distinction at the cash drawer plant between thin and mobile. Thin client is really kind of a bolted down tablet to us. Mobile is really mobile. You're moving around, transacting where the consumer is. And we make that distinction because that affects the hardware platforms. It affects the decisions that they make with the types of equipment that they put in place. And sometimes just replacing a large box cash register with a tablet, in our case, doesn't really affect us, but it might affect Epson, or it might affect Star, or it might affect some other guys that have other equipment out there. The other big thing that's taken place is tablets have enabled retailers to set up, the fancy word was alternate distribution points. And that was a guy who wanted to take his tablet and a cash drawer and go out into the parking lot and sell some stuff for 3 hours. Well, how do you do that? Some tablets, you can plug in stuff. Well, what do you plug in? Well, there's nothing really today, but we're working on that as we speak. Yeah, it's been transformational, honestly. The hardware platforms, the connectivity options, and enabling temporary, in new ways, temporary transactional points in new ways that didn't exist before. So.
Thanks, Paul. And I know, Justin, you guys have been working on a solution to, take both the credit issues out of scope, but still give you the ability to plug all this stuff in and make sure that it works and that we're not interfering with each other.
Sure, I mean, a challenge that tablet-based and especially browser-based point-of-sale see today is really driving local peripherals. So that's something that someone can take off the table. That's a huge value add. I think that there's an assumption, though, that mobility is either kind of an all-or-nothing approach, and I think that's kind of an incorrect assumption. I think the best way to approach mobility at the point of sale is to think of adding mobile POS extensions. So when you walk around the floor today, you're going to see a ton of POS providers that have maybe 50 to 100 man-years of development built into a point-of-sale platform. And by adding a Windows tablet to the mix, you get to add mobility for that to that solution without making a lot of changes at the point of sale, without requiring a lot of custom development. So I think that
2 years ago, we're looking at this, but positioning it as a security solution in conjunction with point-to-point encryption provides value, and you could sell that value to your end user customers. So rather than just selling that box, you can sell a complete solution and tie it into the software.
Paul, I know we've been rip and all the way into just we're going to mix and match as we go along. Any thoughts?
In point of sale with respect to cash drawers, the hardware has to follow the software. So the point of sale software drives the architectural decisions of the hardware, of the cash drawer platform. So being consultative, understanding, supporting the decisions, we have to be part of that, and providing options based on that. That's what we're all about. Shipping boxes in, people buy cash drawers all the time and they don't know what they're buying, and they plug them in and they don't work because somebody didn't tell them what they bought, and they didn't have that partner there. So those calls happen frequently, and we're here to help. And an ISV or an AVAR who can help, can be that partner even at the cash flow level, not just the chip and the pin and the swipe and all that, but you know, getting to know the customer, what their expectations are is critical.
Maybe if I could just,
Yeah.
you know, add one thing to that. So I think if you go back in time, a lot of the RSPA members, they were selling solutions. They were selling PC-based workstations at a time where PCs was still somewhat mysterious. That end-user customers, retailers didn't understand the details, and that's what they needed RSPA members to do. You know, in today's world, retailers are more, because they have smartphones and tablets, they're more comfortable with technology. And frankly, the products that are available today are more plug and play. So the value for the RSPA, and I think there's been some consternation in the membership about how do I keep relevant in this age where, you know, tablets have displaced PCs and my end-user customers are familiar with tablets. Well, here's a great example to maintain that trusted advisor status and be the security consultant, the electronic payment consultant, in addition to providing a bundled solution that includes these things.
Justin?
Just to piggyback on that point, I mean, in an age today where a lot of new point-of-sale entrants are selling direct through websites, whether it's browser-based or tablet-based point-of-sale, it's really important for VARs to take on the technological consultancy role and really understand the needs of each specific merchant and be able to you know, rapidly react with mobility or an EV solution or what have you, really be able to provide a solution that's going to fit that customer's needs. Who doesn't necessarily have the ability to understand what technology works best for them, what's available in the marketplace, and what's important. So it's important for VARs to take on that role and really know their customers, understand their needs, and act accordingly.
Eric?
Well, as a box provider, I provide boxes. So, but to answer the question, I think the world is much more complex today than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it was pretty easy. I want a POS solution. I buy this. There is like 5 solutions available, and that's it. Today, there are a lot more solutions. So I think there is much more value and, in fact, needs from an integrator, from the VAR point of view, to help the merchants and guide the merchants, because they're not going to figure it out themselves. It's, you know, even in the payment space, even when you are knowledgeable, it's difficult to figure out. When you have car brands saying chip and choice, you know, and you go and ask them, what do you mean? Well, we're not quite sure, PIN or signature, you know, we'll see how it goes. And they are the guys that are supposed to drive, you know, where we are going, you know, and then you have merchants, their focus is not payment, their focus is to get paid, but to manage their business, not to figure out all of those complex questions about EMV, about tokenization, about PCI, about end-to-end encryption, and God knows what's going to come next year. So I think there is more value today than there was in the past, just because the world is more complex. Even though the perception is simpler because I buy a tablet and now I can put a POS together. But guess what? You buy a tablet, it's only the beginning of a long road.
Absolutely. We've got about 7 minutes left. There's a whole bunch of people. Any hands, concerns, fears, doubts, insecurities? Questions? We answered everything? Yes?
Maybe just from the payment processor perspective, what are you guys seeing for P2P gateways, tokenization gateways? What does it mean to the merchant, and what does it mean to the VAR?
Adam and Justin?
Well, the issue with point-to-point today is that it's a little bit fragmented. So point-to-point requires it to be the card to be encrypted at the read head and then encrypted at the processor side, and that requires that the processor and the hardware provider are utilizing the same encryption methodology. And right now, because there's so many different varieties of encryption, whether it's voltage or variable or magenta or what have you, it's a very fragmented marketplace. So from a DataCap standpoint, you know, we're trying to write to every single one of those so that we can have a point-to-point encrypted solution for all processors. But because of the fragmentation, it's a little bit slow going just because it's difficult to keep pace. So once that consolidates a little bit in the next couple of years, it'll be a more ubiquitous kind of solution.
Adam?
The PCI-SSC maintains a list of P2P validated solutions. This is where an assessor, such as myself, or another would review the the data is encrypted, how those keys are injected onto the device, how they're decrypted. And implementing that device takes a lot of a network for a merchant of scope, and then the reseller would need to observe how that device is implemented into a merchant environment. Tokenization, we haven't really talked a lot about that here, is an exchange of data so that a recurring transaction can be made without actually having sensitive data stored. If I wanted to have a recurring payment with a customer, I can send this card data to a processor. They give me back a token, and then I hold on to that token. Now, if that token gets stolen, you can't, assuming it's a low value token, it's a low discussion, not everyone can use this token. And if someone steals my card data, or steals my computer even, that token is useless to them. Whereas for me, I'm able to do that monthly recurring payment, or if I'm establishing some kind of periodic sale with this client, I can do so without actually storing the card. So tokenization is fantastic, and as a QSA, the person who's generating that token, they would need to be assessed for how they're generating that token.
David?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing you'll see from a lot of resellers is that, a lot of resellers in the past were maybe a little more open with the credit card processor choice. And I think they're going to try to start to choose partners and processors who are from the processor perspective, and try to enforce it on their clients a little bit more. If you look at the way that like Square has gone to market, for example, they just say, you got to use this processor, and people just go with it with the solution. I think dealers have an opportunity to do that. A lot of dealers are actually making revenue from their processor partners, which is a big part of their dealership now. And I think what it gives them is consistency. EMV is kind of, it's just become even more complex somewhat to buy a pinhead and put it in the right way with the kernels and the injections and everything else. And I don't think dealers just want to walk into a customer and say, who do you want to use? Oh, no, I got to figure out where to get the pinhead from. They're going to want to try to introduce as much consistency as they can to their channel, so they can try to roll out the same pinhead, maybe a couple of different variations, but get it from the same source with the same injection key, encrypted all the right way. And then when there's security upgrades or upgrades to the pin, or like for example SSL and TLS, which were transmission technologies that were just basically the PCI council said are no longer really that good. That when all these security things come out, if their client base is on a more consistent level with what processors they're using, then they're going to have a much easier time maintaining their client base. If a dealer is dealing with 30 customers and 15 different processors, it's kind of a little bit of an organizational nightmare for a VAR. And I think they're just going to try to move away from that, not even just for the revenue from the processor sharing, which is beneficial to them, but so they can just more efficiently advise their clients by being, mastering a few options versus trying to figure out all of them.
Can I just, throw in a thought, and this is really more of a personal from being a former engineer. The good news is that there are a lot of point-to-point encryption solutions now built, right? 3 years ago, they were rarity. Now, there are quite a few. And it could be directly with a processor for a large merchant, or it could be through an ISO. So that's the good news. And there is a lot of clutter. There's a lot of talk about what's the right cryptography to use, et cetera, et cetera. Encrypting data adds a lot of value for your customer. And consider if a large retailers that got whacked last Christmas had only been encrypting your data, a determined identity thief is going to get behind your firewall, right? We've seen that both with large corporations, we've seen it with government. Encrypting data is that next level, that next ring of security. And my thought as an engineer is I wouldn't get too hung up in the minutia. I would get a solution running with my end user customer. And again, it's a value sell to your customer.
Super. Well, Mickey's big hand is on the 10, which says we've run out of time. If you have questions, hit us now. We'll be out in the hallway. We've got booths on the show floor.
Just a reminder to download the app and take a survey, please. And then thank you again to the panel. Great conversation, great discussion.